At long last, here it is, my top 15 favorite movies of all time. Now, the movies on this list are films that I've watched at least two times. It's something I put some thought into, and I think to really put them on my all time best list, I have to watch them a couple times. Just because the first time I watched it, I might have been in a really good mood, or I saw it in theaters and I just like movies more in theaters, or I didn't pick up on some of its flaws or some of its virtues the first time. So I had to see the movie at least twice in order for it to make onto this list. This list is more geared towards my personal preferences rather than me attempting to kind of be objective with how I would rate movies. Like, for instance, if I was being more objective with movie quality, Shawshank Redemption, probably The Ten Commandments, Silence of the Lambs would be on this list, but they aren't on this list because this is more purely based on my personal preference. However, I think a lot of the movies on here are really good and hold up for what they are. So, kind of how my methodology for this has been is over the last 6 months or so, I periodically just create a new favorite movies list completely from scratch. And I just keep doing that over and over again. And then the films that consistently show up, I've been setting aside. And I think I've been able to get it down to 15. And it's there's some fudging involved with it. But let's get into it. Maybe just a couple honorable mentions as films that didn't quite make the cut. We have The Ten Commandments, great biblical movie. Used to watch it every year at Easter. 13 Hours, Secret Soldiers of Benghazi, possibly the best action movie of all time. The Green Mile, great Stephen King film. The Dark Knight actually didn't quite make it. It was hard. Wall-E, probably, there's not very many animated films on this list, but it's up there. And then Indiana Jones also didn't quite make it. It just missed the cut. And by that, it's either Last Crusade or Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think they're fairly similar in quality. So let's get into the top 15 favorite movies. So rounding out the list at number 15, we have the only pure comedy on this list, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. Now, I love Mike Myers. He's probably, I don't know how you describe him, the best director, the best film comedian of all time. He's made a lot of bad movies like The Love Guru or I haven't seen Cat in the Hat, but doesn't look very good. But he made four of my all-time favorite comedy movies: Austin Powers 1 and 2, and Wayne's World 1 and 2. I grew up during the 90s, so I loved these movies. They really reminded me a lot of the 90s and the late 80s. This was back during a time when there was a lot less political correctness. Like, you could never do a movie like any of the Austin Powers films with its gay jokes and its arguably sexist humor and just the general lack of politically incorrect stuff that you couldn't do today. But I just think they were great for having a whole bunch of gags, doing legitimate parodies of things, just being very clever in terms of the dialogue. There's just a lot of things to quote from them. It's especially true because I'm a big James Bond fan, as you'll say later on this list. And it was good I thought this was a good parody. I think unlike some parodies, it was a parody that was kind of a love letter to the original. It didn't really shit on James Bond. It just kind of made fun of some of the more over-the-top elements. And the fact that it was based, the second one at least, seems to be mostly based on You Only Live Twice, is something else I really like. So a really good comedy. I'd recommend Austin Powers 1 and 2, not the third one. And Wayne's World 1 and 2 are also really good. Okay, number 14. Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So this was difficult because I was thinking I would want... Because when it comes to certain franchises, I could probably put Star Wars Episode 3, 4, 5, 6 on a list of my top, 30 or 40 favorite movies. I like a lot of the Star Wars movies. The same thing, and you'll see this later on when we talk about Lord of the Rings. It's like, how do you pick one of the three Lord of the Rings movies to put on the list? How do you choose between The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises? Just because there's certain franchises I like, I don't want the list to just consist of movies in the same franchise. So this was kind of hard to come up with. But ultimately, I decided on including Revenge of the Sith. I was going to initially put it a bit higher on this list, but you'll see why a bit later. So Revenge of the Sith, I think, is by far the most underrated of the Star Wars movies. A lot of people like to shit on it because they didn't like The Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones. But I think this movie more or less completely redeems the first two movies, fixes all their flaws, and adds a lot of stuff in. I think it does a very good job of being a Shakespearean tragedy. There's some things in it, I guess you could say, are a bit rushed, like the visions of Padme dying thing. Whatever the problems are, I think, with Revenge of the Sith, they come from bad setup from the previous two movies. And overall, I just found it an extremely satisfying conclusion to the trilogy that wrapped up all the loose ends, that resolved a lot of the ongoing themes and plot elements. I mean, to me, something that really sticks out as being an example of this is when Anakin just kind of casually cuts down Newt Gunray, who had been kind of the boogeyman of his childhood, who had kind of been his arch enemy when he was young, and now he's so much stronger than him. He's just like barely an afterthought. And you have a lot of good actors in this. Hayden Christensen, I don't think is a bad actor. I think he got bad writing. But if you look at his facial expressions and his eyes, he does a really good job. Ewan McGregor is excellent as Obi-Wan. They give Ian McDermott a lot of time as Palpatine in this movie. Overall, just an excellent kind of Shakespearean tragedy, a great end to the prequel trilogy. It's kind of a shame they never made more Star Wars movies after Revenge of the Sith, but you can't win them all. They probably would have been really bad. Next, we have Jurassic Park, probably another sort of generic pick, but it is one of my favorite movies of all time. This is a film. There's films if it's just playing on TV or someone happens to be watching it, you can sit down at any point and just enjoy the movie. In Jurassic Park's like that, for me, it doesn't really matter where in the film it is. It could be the beginning, middle, end. I can just sit down and watch this movie and enjoy it. As you'll notice a lot from this list, I like movies that take place in kind of a lost world setting, like kind of a journey of discovery type thing, where there's like all these secrets and it's just something very out of the ordinary. Particularly if it's like a 19th century, like Victorian or World War One era, or something kind of like an Indiana Jones, H. Rider Haggard thing. And well, this is a sci-fi movie that takes place in, well, I guess the near future. I don't know, it was made in 1993. It definitely has that feel very strong to it. You have a number of really good performances. Sam Neill's one of my favorite actors, and Jeff Goldblum is just always a treat to watch. The real stars of this movie, though, are the dinosaurs. This movie has some of the best special effects I've ever seen, and I think they still hold up really well today. From my understanding, it was a mixture of CG and practical. It just, the movie looks really, really good. And it's just kind of a visual treat. They really do bring the dinosaurs to life. I think it looks better than a lot of purely CG movies. It's just a really solid, classic adventure movie with a really interesting dino twist to it. Just a really good, solid story, and always a crowd pleaser, for me at least. Next, we have Spider-Man 2. Once again, this is kind of hard, is picking a Spider-Man movie, because they all are very kind of integral to each other, as it were. Like, they're not exactly interchangeable, but thematically, in terms of the style, that sort of thing, they're all very kind of close-knit to each other and closely tied. I think, though, Spider-Man 2 is probably the highest the franchise gets. It kind of takes, I think, the best aspects of Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 3. It just serves it up really good. I love Alfred Molina. I'm just kind of sad he doesn't get more movies. But he, I think, is pretty much the perfect Spider-Man villain in that he's very sympathetic, very tragic. He's kind of the classic Spider-Man villain in that he was a decent man who, due to unfortunate circumstances, partially due to his own pride, was brought down. and there is a very strong tragic quality to him. The Spider-Man movies, I think, once again have a good kind of Shakespearean tragic element to them, with like Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn and Peter and him, and they're fighting even though they're kind of like brothers. And then you have MJ thrown into it. But this movie, I think, has some of the best action scenes of all time. And I rewatched this movie fairly recently, and it still holds up. This came out in 2004, and this looks way better than most movies today. The scenes where Spider Man and Doc Ock are fighting are absolutely amazing. I love the character design. I think this is the best Spider Man costume. I really love Doc Ock's arms. They do a good job of balancing between like sci-fi, and they kind of look like something that could actually exist in real life. And they kind of have a good balance to that. Overall, though, Sam Raimi does a better job than just about anyone I've ever seen of blending humor, action scenes, and camp, and making it very heartwarming and adding in melodramedy than just about anyone else I've ever seen. Like in these films, you can go from this like a reference to Lord of the Rings in the third movie, which is kind of goofy, to a really sad scene of Harry losing his memory and thinking that he's still Peter's best friend. And he's able to do that without it seeming weird or out of place. If you haven't watched the original Spider-Man movies, definitely go give them a watch. Each one of them is a treat. They're all good in their individual way. My only issue with them is it just kind of too accurately captures the awkwardness of life in a lot of cases, the awkwardness and challenges of life, which makes it kind of cringy. That's not like a fault of the movie. I got to give it credit for managing to capture that, but it can be a little awkward if you're sensitive to that sort of thing. So yeah, all three Spider-Man movies are good. This one, I think, because of the visual style and Doc Ock being just such a good villain, I think this one comes out on top as the best of the Spider-Man movies. Next, we have Minority Report. Not sure if this is a unexpected change or not, but this is one of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time. Great Tom Cruise movie. Spielberg is kind of a mixed bag as a director. He's made a couple of my favorite movies of all time, and he's made a couple of movies I really hate. But to me, this is just kind of everything a sci-fi movie should be. You have kind of interesting existential questions about free will, determinism, guilt, responsibility. You have a lot of interesting speculative stuff. Something that's constantly referenced from this movie to this day is the virtual I don't know, virtual reality is maybe not the term, but the holographic controls that Tom Cruise uses at part of the movie to try to like put the crime scene together or something, and it just looks very kind of intuitive and stuff like that. You have all these interesting looking futuristic cars. It's just there's the eye scanning and stuff like that. It just is a very visually stimulating and interesting futuristic world. And there's a lot of good action scenes in this movie. It's very intense. There's lots of cool stuff, like when he gets his eyes changed. Great performance from everyone involved. Max von Sydow does a really good job as the main villain. He's very sympathetic, and I find the movie very morally ambiguous as to whether or not who's right or not. Maybe just to very briefly, if you haven't seen Minority Report. So basically, in a future Washington, D.C., they've discovered that if they use three telepaths combined who have kind of a group mind, the telepaths can predict when a murder's about to occur. So they predicted it's, generally speaking, a crime of passion, I think is about 40 to 60 minutes, and they have this futuristic rapid response force that goes and arrests the person for the future murder. So like early on in the movie, they have a guy catches his wife having sex with her uh, boyfriend, and he stabs him to death with a pair of scissors. However, pre-crime shows up, and they have like robotic spiders and hovercraft stuff to get there in time, and arrests him for the pre-murder. So then the film's kind of this moral quandary where they're arresting people who technically haven't committed any crimes, but it works. There's been no murders in Washington, D.C. for like 3 years or something like that. And it's kind of like, does utopia justify the means? And it's not very obvious. Max von Sydow's character thinks it does, and it's better to put the possibly innocent people in jail and to engage in kind of the abuse of the telepaths by forcing them to live these horrific murders. And honestly, I don't really know where I come down on this in the end, but overall, excellent science fiction film, highly recommend. Next, we have The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Maybe this is kind of a weird film to have on this list. I think this is probably the best Disney animated movie. I don't have Beauty and the Beast on here, but I think it's up there as well. I put this one here just because I find it another one where there's a lot of good moral ambiguity. There's a lot of different character points of view and stuff. And like I said, it's ambiguous who's right, who's wrong, that kind of thing. So, for those of you who haven't seen it, The Hunchback of Notre Dame takes place in Paris. I forget when it is, if it's the late medieval era or the Renaissance or something like that. But the city's more or less being run by Judge Claude Frollo, who is the Minister of Justice for the Kingdom of France at the time. And he's a deeply religious man who's known for his brutal and blind enforcement of the law. He's extremely rough, particularly on gypsies, to his credit. But he punishes any crime with extreme force and to the fullest extent of the law. And he's hated, but also kind of respected. And I find Frollo to be kind of a morally ambiguous character, because for the first half of the movie, it's kind of built up like, oh, he's this bigot, he's evil, he's repressing these people. But later on, when they go to the Court of Miracles, where all the like criminals are hiding, they're massive scumbags. And he's like, it turns out he's 100% right for persecuting these people and trying to protect the citizens of Paris. And a lot of this film is kind of about him as a formerly righteous man, but who has these deep flaws hidden below the surface, kind of falling into temptation. In his case, I guess you could say both pride and lust, and him kind of destroying his life and destroying himself. In contrasted with him, you have Quasimodo, who's a very kind of innocent but good person, who's always willing to help others and always willing to give them a chance. And you do kind of have a bit of a contrast between that unconditionally loving, to a certain extent, kind of New Testament style Christianity with the Old Testament style doom and gloom and fire and brimstone type thing. And there's an interesting contrast between the two. And while Frollo is the antagonist, I don't think he's villainous in the way that a lot of other Disney villains are, because most of his motivations are very understandable. So I do think that's good. The music's really good in it. It's overall, I just think, an excellent film. If you haven't seen The Hunchback of Notre Dame, I really recommend it. Probably the best Disney's ever gone with just being a morally complex story. Next, we have GoldenEye, which is my favorite Bond film. My second favorite is probably You Only Live Twice. But this just kind of did everything that a Bond film should do. And you got to give Martin Campbell a lot of credit. He only directed 2 Bond films, and the 2 Bond films he did, GoldenEye and Casino Royale, completely like rebooted the series and restored it at a point when it was starting to look long in the tooth, and both were extremely successful and are very well remembered. GoldenEye was one of my favorite movies as a kid. I got this out of the store all the time and watched it. Granted, part of that was because Isabella Scorporo and Sam Kay were in it, and they're both very beautiful women. But just in terms of being a really well edited, I know it's 2 hours and 10 minutes long, but it feels a lot shorter than that. It's just a very tightly edited Bond film. You have Bond in Russia. You have lots of like cool Soviet iconography everywhere. You have amazing over-the-top action scenes. Like, this film is some of my favorite action scenes of all time. Like the pre-credit scene, I think, is the best in any Bond film, with the bungee jump and the jump into the plane and the shootout inside of the chemical facility. Then you got the scene where they're driving down the streets of Moscow in the tank, which is hilarious. and you just have so many good iconic scenes in it. This film is absolutely amazing. I think if you've never seen a Bond film before, I'd probably recommend watching this one. Just great movie. Pierce Brosnan is really at his highest during this film. So next we have another Star Wars movie. I know I said I was trying to keep it to one per franchise, but I mean it is what it is. Nothing I can do, but I digress. Do I really need to go into detail about why The Empire Strikes Back is so good? I think it might be the best paced movie of all time. And for a film that's over 2 hours long, that's saying quite a bit. It's just a very, very well edited, paced film. It never feels boring. It never feels drawn out. It also never really feels like they're rushing. You have a bunch of really good interconnected stories. You have something a bit slower with Luke, and then something a bit more dramatic and suspenseful with Han and Leia. And the way they just come together at the end is just really nice. You have a lot of really good, interesting action scenes. Like obviously there's Hoth. I think my favorite duel out of the couple you have in the original trilogy was probably Vader versus Luke on Cloud City, just because it's this cool kind of dystopian looking industrial hell that they fight each other in. There's obviously the classic I am your father thing, which was amazing. But I think this film really took what they came up with in the first film, which was such a perfect encapsulation of the hero's journey in good versus evil, and just kind of elevated it into a much darker but more, it's kind of like a more complex flavor. But I don't think I really need to go into too much detail. The Empire Strikes Back is very well regarded, and rightfully so. Next, we have The Mummy, which is probably a weird one. Oh, this is the video game. 1 second. There we go. 1999 has to be one of the best years for movies of all time, and there's a couple entries from that period on this list. But I mean, I think you can get why I like this movie. It's Lost World. It's from like the pre-World War One era. It's British people and Americans digging up these secrets. It's got a lot of good action in it. It's got a lot of good camp in it. I don't know. It's just a fun movie. It's one of the most fun movies I've ever seen. I've seen this movie probably like 7 or 8 times over the years. It's one of those movies, like I said, I can just sit down at any point in this film, start watching it, and be entertained. I don't really know what else to say about it other than the fact that there's good casting, good writing, good action. The special effects on Emotep are really good. It's just kind of the quintessential Victorian, even though I don't think it takes place during the Victorian period era, supernatural, horror-ish action adventure fantasy film. I just love The Mummy. I don't really know what else to say other than it's just such a fun film. Next one on the list is also like that. The Mask of Zorro. Maybe this is a weird one to put on this list, but this is one of my favorite movies of all time. And this has long been one of my favorite movies of all time. I don't know what it is, but I've always liked Zorro. Even when I was much younger, there used to be a Zorro animated show I watched. I just thought there was something really cool about the character. I like the swashbuckling. I like the outfit. I like the Latin feel. It kind of is a time period you don't really see that much set in, specifically Spanish and Mexican California. It's something I really don't see anything set in. It's just kind of a look into a very different world and a different experience of New World colonialism that we're familiar with. From my understanding, there really wasn't very many slaves or indios in Spanish California, so it's just kind of weird and interesting to see this different world. Once again, this is 1998, so this is around the 99 period. So as for the movie Zorro itself, I mean, there's so many things going for it. It takes place during the 19th century, so that's one. It's a swashbuckling action adventure movie. That's two. It has a lot of good camp slash kind of humor to it. That's three. It has what I consider to be a pretty good romantic subplot. It has three of my favorite actors. I love Antonio Banderas. He's just such a charming, suave guy, and he is the absolute perfect pick to play Zorro. Down to him just being able to use his natural accent. He just looks like Zorro. He is Zorro. You have Anthony Hopkins, who once again is. I love Anthony Hopkins. Perfect pick for this movie. And Catherine Zeta-Jones, who is, in my opinion, a very beautiful woman. Because she's Welsh, her skin tone's a little darker, so she does look very Spanish. And she was perfect in this movie. I think she had a lot of chemistry with Antonio Banderas. But yeah, just a lot of good set pieces, like the mansion, the mine. It just really kind of encapsulates the fun late 80s, 90s action adventure movies. Once again, it's another one of those films I can just sit down at any point in the movie, watch it, and have an absolute blast. Great movie. Highly recommend The Mask of Zorro. Not for everyone, but apparently there's a sequel to this, which I'm never going to watch because it looks absolutely wretched. Okay, so next on the list we have Blade Runner 2049. Now, this was a film I was really excited. It's funny because I initially did not like the original Blade Runner film much, and I rewatched it last year, and it went from being like a 7 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10. The first one really is a masterpiece. I think that this took everything that was good about the first film and just turned it up to 11. This was a really remarkable movie. I remember when I watched this in theaters, I like held my breath the entire film. I couldn't wait to see what happened next. It's one of the most visually impressive films I've ever seen, just in terms of the set pieces, like at the Wallace Corporation. All the scenes with Wallace were really cool. Um, the burned out Vegas was cool. The city in general. There's just so many interesting and fascinating set pieces to work with in this film. The mystery aspects of it I thought were very compelling. As to what is Q the is K the son of Deckard Kane, Deckard, trying to find Harrison Ford. It's one of the first movies in like decades that Harrison Ford actually seems to want to be there for. Generally speaking, whenever he's in a movie these days, he just looks bored and wants to get out as soon as possible. He actually looked like he was having fun in this movie. I found a lot of the characters had really good chemistry together. The soundtrack was absolutely incredible. Just one of the most atmospheric, um, visually impressive, emotionally engaging movies of all time. Absolutely love Blade Runner 2049. Now, for the next one, we're going to have a pick I'm sure everyone sees coming. That is Neon Genesis Evangelion, The End of Evangelion. So this is the movie, other than maybe the number one or two. Actually, no, this is probably in the movies I've watched the most in my life are number 1 and 2 on this list, which we'll get to in a minute. And then probably Attack of the Clones, GoldenEye, and Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. Because when I grew up, we didn't have Netflix or anything. And I had taped Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, and so I watched that until like the tape died. There was also just I get GoldenEye out a lot, and movie 1 and 2 on the list out a lot. Because once again, you couldn't just watch anything. Downloading movies wasn't even a thing. You just watched whatever tapes you had. So this was one of the first DVDs I ever got. I forget when I got this movie. I think I got it in like uh 2004, because I think I was 14 or 15 when I saw this for the first time. And my mother had to special order this in Death and Rebirth because manga wasn't really sold that much in North America. So she special ordered these for me, and it is just insanity. Um, it is madness. It is beautiful. It is horrific. End Evangelion is just a visual and emotional tour de force. Um, I've done like a full endure or rather commentary track for this movie, But I was watching this at a time in my life where I was going through a period of extreme depression, kind of what Anno was going through when he made this in the original series. I had really bad untreated bipolar at the time, and there's just something about this series that was just helped me out a lot. So I would sometimes watch this movie multiple times a week. I don't know why exactly. There's just something so engaging about it. Um, so it just kind of has to be on this list. Now, is it a flawed movie? Yes. Is it pretentious? Yes. Is it kind of an art movie? To a certain extent, but it's something I found very enjoyable, and that meant a lot to me growing up. And yeah, it's End Evangelion. What else can you really say about it? And this brings us to the final three of my favorite movies of all time. Now, this is a bit of a tease, but we're going to go with all three Lord of the Rings movies for this number three spot. I couldn't pick between them. They kind of seamlessly blend together. How can you pick between them? They all have good stuff about them. Two Towers, I think, is the most kind of succinct. Return of the King is the most grand in scale. And Fellowship of the Ring kind of has the most character moments and backstory. So it's how do you kind of pick between the three films? I don't think you really can. So I'm just kind of collectively putting them down. These I regard as, even in an objective sense, some of the best movies ever made. They were made at the absolute perfect time when modern technology allowed them to bring Tolkien's world to life, but before the Great Awakening happened. Films like this would never be made today. You've seen what they did with The Hobbit and what they're probably going to do with the Lord of the Rings Amazon series. It's going to be a complete travesty. But I think they did the best job they could as an adaptation. They took very much the essence of what Tolkien had and they made it into a movie form. And people complain that there's some differences here or there. Like, I think one of the ones I hear a lot is during the Battle of Helm's Deep, the Rohirrim that show up are infantry and not cavalry. Okay, maybe that works in a book, but in a movie, the epic cavalry charge was like one of the greatest moments in cinema, and it was 100% justified. And they had to cut a bunch of stuff out and jazz some stuff up. But I think overall, they're just extremely good adaptations. Some people complain that they didn't get the characters done very well. And some of the changes to Aragorn, I guess, some people didn't like. But what's his name again? Viggo Mortensen is just such a charismatic actor. He's just very charismatic. He was able to just do such a good job with the script they gave him. You really felt like he was the leader. He just exuded, like I said, charisma. I think my favorite character in the movies is probably Gimli. Sure, they made him a bit of the comic relief character, but I think it made sense in the context, and I don't think it really disrespected him at all. Because Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn don't have a ton of personality in the books, and they really gave them a good personality. And I think the thing that's just the very best about these movies is you get the impression that the cast genuinely liked each other, that they were a fellowship, that they hung out outside of it, and that they were having the time of their lives making this movie. I think probably the best example of that is during the Battle of Helm's Deep. You can just see that they're having a blast doing it. And when they're interacting with each other, like the scene where it's like, you toss me. It's like, don't tell the elf, and then Aragorn's like, not a word. You can tell that they're just like so excited to be there. And that just radiates off of these movies. But they're genuinely, they have some funny moments, but overall they're just excellent epic fantasy movies. Some of the best movies ever made. I don't know if we'll ever get films like this again because like I said, even if there's more technology now, everything is just CG. And these movies definitely have CG in it, but not as much CG as we have today. And everything today is just going to be super woke. So, if you haven't seen them, what are you doing? Go watch all three Lord of the Rings movies. They're all super long, but 100% worth it. Great, excellent film. Number two, we have Terminator 2 Judgment Day. just such a damn good movie. Everything about this movie's great. The writing's great. The action scenes are great. The music is incredible. The music for all the Terminator films are good, but this one's especially good. The cinematography's great. It has one of my favorite villains of all time in the Liquid Terminator. The Liquid Terminator is just so cool and so impressive, especially by 1991 standards. Arnold is back and better than ever, and he's just so damn cool in this movie. One of the coolest things you can have in any film is to have the bad guy from the previous movie come back as a good guy, but maintain everything that made them a good bad guy. So you have Arnold back, and he's just in top form here. In my opinion, other than maybe Total Recall, I guess, probably the best performance of the career. He gives a very kind of subtle performance because he's not supposed to really have emotions as the Terminator, but at the same time, he is starting to develop them. There is a bit of a Christ-like metaphor with John Connor in this, where you have Joseph in the form of Schwarzenegger, and then his mother Linda, Sarah Connor, and the father figure dies at the end, leaving the mother to raise him. But yeah, just the interaction between the characters are really good. The film is very well paced. Sure, it's like 2.5 hours long, but I could barely even like notice that it was that long. It just flowed really well. You have so many iconic scenes, like the fight in the forage. You have Arnold using the minigun on the police cars. You have the scenes at the insane asylum, which are also just good. I don't really know what else to say. It's just one of the best science fiction movies of all time and one of the best action movies of all time. I've watched this movie so many times over the years, and every time it's just an absolute treat. And that brings us to my favorite movie of all time. It was difficult between this one and the other one, but ultimately I don't think it could have been anything else. I'm talking, of course, about The Matrix, 1999. My favorite movie of all time. I've seen this probably like 20 times over the years. Everything about this movie is just a winner to me. It was one of the most innovative films of all time in terms of its visual style, how it did action scenes. The film looks amazing. It still looks amazing, even after all of this time. There's just so much going on in this movie. There's all this like interesting visual stuff. There's like the philosophical stuff in the background. There's the character interactions. There's such a like wide variety of different action scenes. Like you have the lobby shootout, you have the chase scene, you have Smith versus Neo at the subway station. You have scenes in the present with the various machines. You just have like a lot of different aspects. At some points it's an action movie, some points it's a suspense movie. Some points it's kind of a thriller. We have this interesting contrast between the present day real world scenes and the Matrix scenes. I've watched this movie probably a dozen times. Every time I watch it, I still find something new that I hadn't noticed before. This whole film was just a great labor of love. Um, and it's something I like everything about it. It really captures the 90s and early 2000s in terms of what the fashion was, how kind of movies were going, kind of the concerns people had, kind of, once again, with something like Terminator 2 or some of the other movies on this list. It was really once you're starting to get back into robots going amok, a dystopian future. So it just, I don't really know what else to say about it. It's The Matrix. What can you say? It's Keanu Reeves' big role. I guess there was also Bill and Ted and Johnny Mnemonic and some other film. But it was just an incredible film in every regards. It's a movie that I have a lot of love for, that I could even come back to and watch now and still love it. But it's definitely my favorite movie of all time. So that concludes the list of my 15 favorite films of all time. I kind of gave a little bit of a explanation as to why I liked each one that much. I'd probably recommend checking out any of the movies on this list. Some of them are personal preference, and they may not be up your alley, but if they look like they're up your alley, go give them a try. Maybe you'll like them, maybe you'll not. But as with anything else, it is what it is. I hope you enjoyed that I finally put this video out there. God bless, and I'll talk to you all real soon.